Good morning. Our scripture reading this morning comes from 1 Samuel 17, 40 through 51. Then he took his staff in his hand and chose 5 smooth stones from the brook and put them in his shepherd's pouch. His sling was in his hand, and he approached the Philistine. And the Philistine moved forward and came near to David with his shield bearer in front of him. And when the Philistine looked and saw David, he disdained him, for he was but a youth, ruddy and handsome in appearance. And the Philistine said to David, "Am I a dog, that you come to me with sticks?" And the Philistine cursed David by his gods. The Philistine said to David, "Come to me, and I will give your flesh to the birds of the air and to the beasts of the field." Then David said to the Philistine, "You come to me with a sword and with a spear and with a javelin. But I come to you in the name of the Lord of hosts, the God of the armies of Israel, whom you have defied. This day the Lord will deliver you into my hand, and I will strike you down and cut off your head. And I will give the dead bodies of the host of the Philistines this day to the birds of the air and to the wild beasts of the earth, that all the earth may know that there is a God in Israel. And that all this assembly may know that the Lord saves not with sword and spear, for the battle is the Lord's, and it will give you into our hand."
Hey, we got a good crowd this morning. You all look good too. Dressed for spring. It was shining out there. It's kind of is now. I always like when the sun's shining here. You all light up, and boy, when the sun isn't shining, it can be a rough crowd. I'm not kidding. You guys are the when it comes to the weather, you folks are affected by it more than anybody I've ever been around. I can even tell Laura, if it's pouring down the rain and or snowy, I tell her, well, there won't be many at church this morning. We just know. But you all do a great day, or a good job when the day is great. I'm not saying you're fair weather Christians at all. I'm just saying that you're kind of like I am. When it's dark outside and it's gloomy, it's just it's hard to get motivated, isn't it? So, very good. What I am saying is you guys are like when I used to put siding on in the fall, where you tear the siding off and there'd be bugs all over the wall that weren't moving at all. And about midday, the sun would hit them and then they'd take off. So I'm saying you're like those old bugs is what I'm really saying. I haven't preached for 3 weeks, so I got a lot to say. I didn't hear any amens. Yeah, it's 10:53, so I'm going to get started and try to get done at a good time. Laura set out a roast last night, but I couldn't help but notice she didn't cook it this morning. So I'm going to have to find some place to eat. I got a lot to say about her this morning. So over 150 years ago, Henry Varley said, "The world has yet to see what God can do with and for and through and in a man who is fully and wholly consecrated to him." I've thought about that saying a lot, and I mean it. That saying I've known for 20-some years, and I've often wondered if it's a true saying. Has there ever been a man or a woman who was totally 100% entirely sold out to God? Now, I know that I'm not that man. I've known good men and I've known good women, but I don't know that I've ever met or even heard of someone who every second of the day, everything about them, everything they do, everything they want to do, everything they will do is completely and entirely sold out to the will of God. Now, there are great spiritual leaders in this world that people look to as great spiritual leaders. People look to the Dalai Lama as a great spiritual leader. We found out this week that he enjoys asking young children to suck on his tongue. Did you read that? And someone says, well, maybe before we jump to judge this spiritual giant, maybe it's a cultural issue. Well, I don't know about you, but I've never heard of very many Buddhists who go around asking children to suck their tongue. I'm not talking about these famous preachers who we know can fall. When I was growing up in the 80s, I saw that all the time. It seemed like every year there was another preacher who had, and there's a term for it that the media likes to use, fallen from grace. I'm talking about the everyday, average, normal person who says, Lord, I'm going to be 100% sold out for you. And in the Bible, I think David comes closer than anybody else. Now that may be hard to believe, because David does things that makes you wonder how he maintained the grace of the Lord. And yet he's the only man in the Bible of whom it is said is a man after God's own heart. And what does that do? I think above everything else, that gives me great hope. I know my faults. I know my trial. And I'm not even very good at hiding it. I mean, I find myself in what the French call faux pas all the time, saying the dumbest things, doing the dumbest things. But the Lord's grace has always been good. I turned 46 this month, right? Are we in May or April? We're in April. I had expected my life to be completely different than it is right now. Completely different. As a matter of fact, Linda, you said you can't make these things up. I would never have made this situation up. I never saw it coming. Now, I thought I did. I remember being in my 20s and having everything planned out. Folks, when I decided to come here, we were supposed to have 250 people in the pews right now. And I was convinced that me plus Jesus was going to make it happen. But isn't it ironic how the best laid plans don't always seem to be the reality? But I turned 46. And I got a little down about that. The last birthday that I got down about was when I turned 30. Because I really liked being a 20-something. That was nice. All right? But I didn't have any problem all through my 30s. And when I turned, what my dad told me, when you turn 40, everything goes downhill. He's just a spark of joy. But I was even all right with that. But 46, for some reason, could have been the fact that I seem like I'm starting life over. I was going to be one of these guys that retired early. I had my children raised. Apparently that's not going to happen now. But then I got to thinking. I got to thinking about George Foreman, of all people. You remember in 1974, he went to Zaire to fight Muhammad Ali. You realize that everyone who was anybody who knew anything about boxing said that George Foreman was going to whip Muhammad Ali and it was going to be done in the first 3 rounds. Well, that didn't happen. And the rumble in the jungle didn't go the way George Foreman thought it would go. And I imagine it probably took Muhammad Ali by surprise, because George Foreman was a towering and fearful man. Many years went by. Everyone had written George Foreman off. When he was 46 years old, he had a big belly, and he was back in the boxing. All those years that he fell out of circulation, you know what he was doing? He was preaching. And before long, this group for troubled young people that taught them how to box and how to be good men came into some financial problems, and he only knew one way to get money, so he went back into boxing. And I remember what they'd say. It became a joke. It'd be on late night TV. They'd show George Foreman, this fat old guy, going out there, but he just kept winning and winning and winning. And 3 years later, after he decided to get back into boxing, he got the match he wanted. It was with Michael Moorer. Michael Moorer was a great boxer. And everyone said, this is going to be a joke, because Michael Moorer was the champion. And at 46 years of age, George Foreman beat him. 46! I'm 46! Who knows who I could whip, right? I think of Jack Nicholson. You ever heard of Jack Nicholson? I'm not talking about the actor, I'm talking about the golfer. Scott, you love golf, right? So you know who I'm talking about. At 46 years old, he won the Masters. And he had competed for years, but at 46. And then I think, why stop at 46? I think of Caleb in the Bible, who was 80 years old when they crossed over the Jordan and was supposed to go into Ai, and they were going to try to defeat the enemy of God. At 80 years old, Caleb says, give me this mountain. But there was one other person I could think of, maybe more than any other, whose age should have hindered him from being a champion of God, and that is David, the young boy David. The Bible says that he was ruddy. Ruddy, and in chapter 16, it says that he was beautiful. Ruddy, do you know what ruddy means? I had to look at a Bible dictionary. Ruddy means red. And so I'm not exactly sure what David looked like. Red probably refers to his complexion, like the Native Americans. What did we say about their skin? Redskins, right? Now, we've changed that name in the NFL. You know that Washington Redskins changed their names, right? Apparently, the name was super offensive. They got rid of the Redskin part, but they didn't get rid of the offensive part, the Washington part. But nevertheless, here you have this young David. Maybe he's red-skinned. I was around the Mediterranean people, and they really don't look red. Some people believe that he had red hair. Now imagine this little red-haired boy. And so he's ruddy and he's pretty. Laura and I joke about Marley. Marley sometimes seemingly is not all there. He falls about 100 times a day. He's knocked teeth out. I really don't see how he's still living. But have you ever seen a boy that's any prettier than him? And Laura is always happy. She says, you know, at least he's pretty. So hopefully he goes a long way with his good looks. But here you have David, who's this pretty boy. And the idea of saying he's a pretty boy, that's what you call the boy that's kind of we'd call him a sissy, wouldn't we? And so what'd they think about David? He's this gentle little boy. That's the way I got treated growing up. Not that I was pretty, but when I was a little boy, I had a grand mal seizure. Grand mal. And they had to put me in Columbus Children's Hospital. I was in there for a few months. I was in a bubble for a month. And so my mother was super overprotective. And I wrestled all through. I was all through Pee-wee and high school wrestling. And I remember being in grade school, and my head would hit the mat, and Mother would run out on the mat. And I'd look up and I'd see my dad saying, dear, don't go out there. Don't do this to him. Right? But she'd say, but he's so gentle. And I'd think, oh. So all the boys on the team kept saying, they called me Gentle Josh. But here is this boy who isn't concerned about his age. What kind of people does God use? The people God uses almost 100% of the time in the Bible are common people. You remember in chapter 16 of 1 Samuel, Samuel comes to Jesse and he says, I'm going to anoint one of your children. God is going to anoint one of your children. And he brings out his oldest son, Eliab. And then he brings out the next. Before long, he brings out 7 others. And Samuel says, do you not have any other children? And he says, I have one, but he's with the sheep. Samuel says, go and fetch him. We're not going to sit down till that boy gets back here. And this pretty, ruddy, beautiful boy comes back. And Samuel says, and anoints him, and says, the Spirit of the Lord was upon him. And that David feared God from that day forward. And then we have our event. This great event that happened in the valley of Elah. The event of which David slays the giant. You know, God uses the unknown and the ordinary, I think, because he'll receive the most glory. Think of Moses. Think of the servant girl and Naaman. Think of the 12 disciples. I mean, as a matter of fact, John MacArthur recently wrote a book called 12 Ordinary Men. And he used that adjective, and I think he used it rightfully so. These men were ordinary men in that they were ordinary to their times. They were not extraordinary at all. As a matter of fact, being Galileans, they were separated from those who were from Judea, and sometimes were looked down upon. But God has always used the ordinary, and he's always used obedient people. The people used by God are willing to do the most mundane task for the glory of God. Think about the disciples who, when Jesus was preparing to enter Jerusalem the last week of his life, he calls the disciples together, and he lets them know that he's got a big chore for them. And I can imagine these disciples, they're wanting to know what Jesus wants them to do, because these disciples have argued already about who was going to be the greatest in his kingdom. And he says, I got something for you to do. I want you to go find me a colt. Now imagine what they must have thought. Are you serious? We don't have anybody else to do this? We've got all these people following us. We are part of your elite group, and you want us to go find the colt? And Jesus doesn't say any more. Other than that, go find a colt. How many times have you been asked to do something that you think is mundane or meaningless, and you think nothing comes of it? I want to tell you, when you're working in the Lord's church, I don't think there's any work that is meaningless. Sunday school teachers, man, I want to tell you, you have more of an influence than I will ever have up here. When I look back, being a young fella going to church, do you know what I remember? I don't remember what the preacher said. I remember what my Sunday school teacher taught me. I remember how she loved me, how she'd hug us. That was a big deal in my house. Hugs were not passed around very often, but those Sunday school teachers would do it. Now hugs, they're hard to give out anymore. Laura struggles with it all the time. She won't hug a child, but the child comes in for a hug, she certainly does it. Fortunately, she gets a bunch of them. So much so that I don't get any hugs when she gets home. God uses ordinary people who are willing to be obedient. The people God uses are consecrated people. He uses people whom he loves. We could go through this passage and notice how many times David reveals his personal relationship to God. God uses people who are relying on him. Isn't that interesting? We don't want to deal with people unless we can rely on them. God uses people who are relying on him. David voiced his faith and confidence in the Lord. He wasn't looking to man-made weapons and resources. He picks up 5 smooth stones. Some people have guessed maybe that he picked up 4 more than he needed because Goliath had brothers. That's very possible. But he stuck to what he had always worked with in his life, and that was his faith in God. Now, I want to note here that all the battles that are won in our lives will be won by God. If we are ever used in this life, it'll be because we are leaning upon him and his resources for our strengths and our provisions. God still wins battles today, folks, in your life. Now, I don't know if Peter Ray would like me to tell this story, but I'm going to anyway. I'll start with my own. You know, I knew the deal when I married Laura. She had never had children. And she was getting up there, and she had a conversation with me a few years ago about what they call a biological clock. And she was trying to say, you know, we don't have to have kids and all these things and that description of her biological clock, but all I was hearing was one thing. She wants kids. Well, let me say she wants a kid. All right? And I knew the deal, and I waited before I said I do. I mean, she hounded me to marry her and wouldn't let me alone. Finally, I gave in. And of course, she's been blessed ever since. But, you know, you get these tests. And Laura called me in and said, what does this look like to you? I said, it doesn't look like anything to me, Laura. She says, does this mean that I'm pregnant? I was like, no. So for 3 days, over and over again, I don't know how many tests she went through. But every time I'd say, nope, that's not what that means. Not what it means. Well, Peter Ray and Amantha were married for 17 years. And they went to doctor after doctor to try to have a baby. And finally, the best specialist in Morgantown told them, there is nothing that can be done for you. You cannot physically have one. And then gave them all these other options. But they prayed year after year. And one day, Peter Ray got called upstairs to find his wife crying. And she was looking at one of those tests. And Peter Ray said, I was used to it. She always cried when she looked at those tests. But this cry was different. This day, that little test said they were going to have a baby. Isn't that amazing? And Peter Ray said, I don't know if that's what it means or not. She said, I've looked at these over and over again for 17 years. And I know what the answer is. 17 years. Now, you can call that whatever you want to call it. I'm not going to argue semantics. Peter Ray said, I don't call it a miracle. I call it God interceding. Call it what you will. But I believe God is still winning battles in the lives of those who rely on him. And I also believe he has a sense of humor. Because when I went to the doctors, I found out we were having 2 of them. But if George Foreman can knock out Michael Moore at 46, and Jack Nicholson can win the Masters, I can make it 5 days staying up. I've only made 4 so far. Every week I make it 4. But that's my mountain now. That's my new goal. To stay up and make it all 5 nights till Laura's able to take over on the weekend in the evenings. But I can do this. Why? Because I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. And David, as a young boy, realized this. I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. When he looked out across that valley of Elah and he saw the Philistines mocking God, he said, who is this uncircumcised Philistine who bringeth a reproach upon the armies of the living God? And if nobody else was going to do something about it, he was. And when we look around at all the enemies of the church today, I want you to know something. The fact of the matter is, nobody's probably going to do anything about it. Who does that leave? That leaves you. And that means God has called you, maybe called you for this very time and this very purpose, to make an impact on everyone that you're around. David was sold out to God. I'll quit there. I want to encourage you to come back tonight. We're going to hear the rest of David's story. God is still winning battles. Sometimes we just have trouble seeing them. I think it's the everyday little things that moves the world. We always want to look to Washington, and we always want to look on a world platform at all the gigantic big things and big people. But I believe it's the little things and the little people, the ordinary folk, who make a difference in the kingdom of God. This morning we want to encourage you, if you're not a Christian, to please come as we stand and sing our hymn of invitation.